When you first start Photoshop, you'll be introduced to this welcome screen or something similar to it. And if you click on New File, we'll open a new file to take a look at the interface. I would go ahead and select the default Photoshop size and then click on Create. Looks something like this. At the top is a typical Windows menu. If you click on the names, the menu opens up and you can see different types of options within each one. The row below it is called the options bar, and this bar will change depending on what tool we're using at the time. Right now I've set up to paintbrush, so this is the paintbrush options. If I click on clone stamp, we'll have the clone stamp options. So depending on the tool, text options, depending on the tool, that will change. Notice that these tools here, there's a small little triangle next to them. If you right click on the tool, it opens up a flyout with different options. So the eraser tool here has some different eraser options. The brush tool has different drawing tools, brush, pencil, and so forth. And not only does this change, but again, this changes up here as well. So we've got those two options going on. If I just hover over a tool with the mouse, we have information on it and even a link to watch a quick video. So if you ever need to find a little bit more about a certain tool or what you can use, hover over it and then you can watch a quick video. On the side here are the panels. The layer panel down here, different kind of properties, and then up at the top, the color panel. And that changes depending on what we're using. We can pick different things about it that we want to address. This layout is the workspace. We can see if you go to Window, Workspace, that is our essentials or the default workspace here. But if you're doing different types of work, you can set up different workspaces, plus even create your own workspace. If you ever find yourself missing a palette or missing a tool panel or something like that, go to Window, Workspace, and click on Essentials. And it'll get us back to this kind of default view, and we'll go from there. Typically, we won't need to do anything other than what the default is necessary. In your files you've downloaded is a PDF that shows what some of these elements do and what they're called. Those are the buttons. And you can always go back to them and just see how they are and their keyboard shortcuts. It's always good to know those keyboard shortcuts. So the lasso tools, you'd click L and you'd get that lasso tool and be able to work with it right away. So those are just important for you to be aware of. Photoshop originally just started as processing to clean up. And so some of the corrections that are done in Photoshop that are very common are red eye removal, whitening the teeth, smoothing out wrinkles, and so forth. And so we have that. I have that as different files that you can look at, and they're in your folder as PDFs and also the files you can play with. And that's something if you want to learn more. What we're going to focus on is more things you can do to create images and such that can be used in SketchUp and modeling in general. Similar to some of these adjustments, though, we might want to adjust the image we have. So we have an image called Venice Boat. So if you go to File, Open, and go to wherever you downloaded your 01 folder and unzipped it, inside there's a smaller subfolder called Images. Double click on that and it looks something like this. If it doesn't, you might want to click over here on the different icons. So in your Windows here, this little button here, we can do might have had a detail mode to look like this, just words, small icons, and then of course I'm using this large icon setting just to see the image as well as the name underneath. There's just different ways to organize your files. So let's go ahead and open Venice Boat. And you notice that we also have Venice Boat as well as the original one that we opened. So we can open more than one file here and switch between them if we wanted to. So let's say this is an image that we want to use in our project. And it's basically an image taken from a museum site. And so here's the museum classification right here. So the way the museum, wrote and located this image in their collection, which that designation. And we want this image, let's say, but we don't want that wording to show up because this is supposed to be a private residence or a different location. So what we can do is the spot healing brush tool. It's going to be right here on the side, looks something like this. And if we right click on it, we see the different ones. We want to make sure it's spot healing brush. That's the current one, and that's what we'd like. Notice the cursor shows up. We can change the size of the cursor using the brackets on our keyboard. If we do the right bracket, it becomes bigger. We do the left bracket, it becomes smaller. And that's a good size. I can get most of the text with this left bracket right here at this size. Click and drag. And it has gotten rid of that text. Let's say looking at this even further, this gondola over here, we think might be a distraction. It's not exactly what we're looking for. So I'm going to get in here. I'm going to clean this up by also clicking and dragging over it, and it will clean that up and make it disappear. And let's say we're going to go even further, and I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this gondola altogether. So I'm just going to click and drag over it with the cursor, get that person to this person and their reflection. But this time when I click away, whoa, what happened? We've got like a building going on here. There's like a little clock tower or something going on there. What? This little thing seems to be repeated back down here. We've got some clouds in the water. What's happening here? Let's go to edit, undo that last one, get that boat back. The way this thing works is that it's looking at the adjacent pixels and picking out ones to repeat or to copy. So when we pick such a large element like the whole gondola like this larger one, with all this variation around it, it took some of the sky down, it took some of this image over here down and brought it in. So the spot healing brush is good, but there is some things to be kind of keep track of. Here's a good example as well. So here's a photograph. The original is right here. But what we want is we just want to maybe get rid of the plants or get rid of the wall decoration. But you see what happens when the regularized lines, it doesn't quite catch it well. So the spot healing is not really the best to use for that. What you want is more of a variegated background or a multiple textured background, not too different from the water that's right nearby, and use that. So let's take a look at that in another image then. Let's go to File, Open. This time let's look at the one called Wall. This is the one called Wall. And again, let's say this is a wall that perhaps we want to use in an entryway. And actually, we plan to have a planter, so this plant being here on the side is perfect as something that could happen there. Maybe it's a nice little backdrop. So this is exactly what I want, except there's a model sitting here, a person, and we need to get rid of that person. So I'm going to go ahead and bring again, use the spot healing brush tool, make my cursor maybe a little bit larger. I'm just going to click and drag. And clicking and dragging, I'm holding down my key to make sure I click and drag the whole person. And when I let go, the person's gone. Again, because of the background being modeled and the way it was set up, it was easy to do. Now, I kind of do see a little bit of something going on here and here. And when that happens, I might just go back over this just a little bit more and tweak it. Let's look at another example. Another way of doing this, File, Open. So we can use let's open up this desert. We can use the spot healing brush to take something out. Let's use a kind of different technique where we can select the element we want instead of clicking and dragging around a big element, and using the lasso tool to remove the person. Here's a good example on this one. So let's say this is something we may want outside of the window. Maybe that we took a picture of the site. And so from this window, we'll have a view out towards the valley here. It's a great looking view, but we've got this person in it, and we don't want this person to be part of this view. So we can click on the lasso tool here, and I'm just going to click and drag around this person. When I go back to the beginning, we'll have these marching ants. They're kind of like this dashed line, kind of showing me that this has been selected as something to be removed or to do something with. Now I'm going to go to Edit, Fill, and what I want to fill it, basically it says, what do you want to fill it with? So the foreground color, the background color, or just any other color, and content aware, pattern, or history. In this case, I want content aware. What do these other ones do? Well, the foreground color will replace this area with this foreground color, which is white in this default setting. A background color would be the black. So this is white foreground, black background. Or pick another color. We can just pick the color over here and make that the color. In this case, I want content aware, which does a similar thing. It looks at the content around what we've selected and will replace whatever we selected with that content. So I'm going to click on content aware. Pattern would be a pattern that we have selected previously. Same thing with history. Again, all black, 50% gray, all white. So those are kind of default settings. We're going to do content aware, and I'm going to say OK. And you can see that it basically looked at the nearby content and replaced it, replaced what was there with that content. It's still selected, so I'm going to do Control D on my keyboard to deselect. And that's pretty good. I mean, it really does look pretty clean. You might need to clean up some things. One thing that kind of stands out for me right now is that we still have the shadow down here. So just, when you do clean up these images or you adjust images, kind of give it a double look again and make sure that it's adjusted well. So we looked at taking things out. We looked at that, taking things out of images or adjusting images using both the content aware and also the spot healing brush. Let's look now at another modifying tool and basically image straightening. Let's go ahead and file open. And let's look at 2007-06 dance. And it opens up, looks something like this. So this was a good site, a nice event going on here. However, when I was holding the camera, I was holding it at a little bit of an angle, and I basically got this kind of slope going on here, which didn't exist. The floor was flat. So it needs to be straightened out a bit. Over here on the side, about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 icons down is the ruler tool. The ruler tool is very good in the sense that it can straighten things and line things up. So click on the ruler tool, the icon changes, so does the icon on my little toolbar. And I'm going to just click and drag a spot that I say that should be, so I'm clicking and dragging, let go of my mouse, that should be horizontal. So I click on straighten layer, and there we go. Now that layer is horizontal to the image, and you can see that there's no sense of slope anymore. One thing you may have noticed now, though, is that we've got these little squares showing up in the corners and such. And basically what that is it's the way the computer program shows us that there's no image there. So instead of having just a white area, they use this checkerboard area to say, hey, there's no image there. And we can do it a couple different ways to resolve this, because otherwise we will have these odd shapes in the corners that just won't have anything in them. One way would be to use that content aware and just kind of click and drag, and when you let go, it fills it in. That's one way of doing it. The other one is using this crop tool. If I click on crop tool right here, and I can just kind of come in a little ways here, come in up here. And I'm coming in so that the image is fully enclosed within. So you can see, and then right click, crop. So in this way, I have made the image a little bit smaller, which that may or may not be a problem. So either one or the other would be a good way of getting rid of those blank areas. Let us go ahead and look at what is exactly happening with these images, how things are being straightened out, and so forth. Let's go ahead and close out all the open images, and we don't need to save them. You can if you'd like to, but we don't really need to save them. This is an example of how we can modify images. Let's go ahead and do open, and let's go ahead and open up this 2012-06 flowers. What's happening with these images when we adjust them is that we're affecting the pixels. For this computer program, this is not an image of flowers, but rather dots of color that, when we put them together, looks like flowers. If you click down here on the zoom button down here and just start clicking at one spot, and eventually you'll see that the image starts to become pixelated, and then eventually just becomes a field of full amount of color. Some one shade, some other shade, and some in between. When we get that close, we're really seeing what it's made of, which is a bunch of little rectangles, little tiny spots of color called pixels. So now again, we're not looking at a rose or a field of flowers, we're looking at pixels. Each pixel is indeed separate. It's not connected to the others. And each pixel is one square, and that square has only one color in it. The smaller the size of the pixel, the more detail you get in an image, because you can zoom up and still see the image clearly. If you notice, we had to click quite a few times to get into this image. This type of image is called a raster image. A raster meaning rows and columns. And that's how Photoshop works in a raster situation. And every picture is made with pixels, and it's rectangular. Even if the image seems to be round, it's not really round. It's still a rectangular image. It's just that the corners of that image may be invisible elements, like that checkerboard we saw. So the flower image is raster, but some of the programs that we use could be vector-based. And you can tell the difference between them because here are two different circles. This one was done in AutoCAD. This is an image file, and we open it up in Photoshop so we see the pixel of it. And as I zoom in on this circle in AutoCAD and refresh the screen, you can see that the image, the line stays straight and clear, and I keep zooming up over and over and over and over again, and the line would always be a simple, straight, clearly defined line. When we zoom up here on this circle, you start seeing that pixelation. You start seeing the little different pixels show up with the different elements of color. If you see it far enough, it looks like a solid line, but it really is made up of different colored squares. So the difference is pixels per inch and dots per inch. And how do we think about that? And this one site that I've downloaded a link to there is that dots per inch is not really what matters. It doesn't matter what the dots per inch is. You can leave it to be whatever you want it to be. And the only thing that matters, though, is the number of pixels, right? So depending on the pixel size, and they're showing you 800 by 1000, you can print that as an 8 by 10 or 24 inch by 36 inch. You still have the same number of pixels. It's just depending how far apart they're spread, okay? So just to kind of be aware of that. There's also something else here about DPI, that greater than 300 dots per inch, the human eye has trouble picking up anything anyways, any differences. So just kind of be aware of that. You can make it be so fine-tuned that it doesn't really matter. The important thing is, how big are you printing it? And then how many pixels do you need so it prints clear enough? And they did this here in this particular link, where they're showing you 40 by 50 pixels and 400 by 500 pixels. And they're both printed at 240 dots per inch. And so you can see that how blurrier this image is over this one, because this has more pixels. So there's a chart in your folder that was copied down, showing you the different sizes of printing and dot per inch resolution, what that means, and minimum print sizes. Also, something to consider is viewing distance, how far away you are going to be from this image. So a 4 by 6 you might hold in your hand, but a 24 by 36 you'll probably, you want it a little further away. You can see that there's different dots per inch and recommended minimums that you might want to do, so that you do get that 300 dot per inch more or less that the human eye can take. And here's some other examples of how many pixels you need depending on the size you're printing. So between these two, you should have a good idea. And you will be printing posters in the future here, so you might want to make sure that you have a good size for pixels. The pixel per inch is also important because we don't want to have an image larger than necessary working in SketchUp. And again, there's a link I have for you about this, showing how this image, when you look at it here at this scale, you can barely tell the difference, but there's different numbers of pixels and there's different sizes. The larger the pixels you have, the larger the image, it does tend to slow up SketchUp and other programs as well, because they're constantly recalculating this. Another example is this clocks SKP file, the SketchUp file. It's in the Optimizing Textures folder, and there's two clocks pretty much exactly the same. And the difference in size of the SketchUp model itself is the pixels used. And so this is a good example. You can zoom up on it and look sideways and so forth, and you'll see right away that there's very little difference in how that is visually appealing to the eyes or sufficient to the eyes for that. I would say you may want to use a higher detail if it's a really close-up shot. But for most elements, keeping it not quite as high detailed is really a good idea. It will make your SketchUp move faster, work better. Let's return back to our flowers, and if you click on the magnifying glass and you right-click and say Fit on Screen. So right-click on the image, Fit on Screen, to get back to here so we can see this. So image size, we talked about pixels per inch, we talked about dots per inch, and so forth. So let's just go to image size, and just see what that does for us here. So this tells us information on our image so we can make some decisions. This resolution is 300 pixels per inch. This is how big it is in inches. If we click here, we can just find out how big it is in pixels. So there's different ways of getting it. So again, looking at that chart, and you want to know the size that you need it to be, or whatever, make it bigger or smaller, this will tell you information that you can adjust and resample it. So one way we can make this a little smaller is by reducing the pixels per inch. And so I'm going to go right here and type that, make that 50. And when I do 50 pixels per inch, you can see that the size is going to change. Click OK. And you can see now it's somewhat smaller for me to fit it on the screen. Right-click, Fit on Screen. And you can start seeing now what the other article is talking about, the pixelation going on. So if I needed to print this out at this scale, this would be not a good pixels per inch size, but it is a much smaller image. If you go to image size, you'll see the original resolution of 300 pixels per inch, change it to 50, change the image size from 8.11 megabytes to 230 kilobytes. So 8.11 is like 8,110 kilobytes, and this is just 230. So again, that's going to be a smaller piece. We can do the same as well with changing the width. So let's say it's a 5-inch piece. Let's go back to inches here. So let's say we have a 5-inch piece. Well, let's go back. Let's undo, edit, undo. All right, and then right-click, fit on screen. There you go. So let's go to image size, and let's go back to inches, just so we have this to work with here. So let's say I want the width to be 1 inch. Maybe that's how big it needs to be. Notice the other side is automatically adjusted, and there it is. It's not quite as bad because we still had it at 300 pixels per inch. So the pixelation, when you right-click, fit on screen, because it's 300 pixels per inch, wasn't too bad. But again, if you take a look at what it did, compare it. So before, again, 8,000 kilobytes came down to 268. It's almost like the other one, and it's still 300 pixels per inch. And that's what they were talking about, that pixel per inch is not as important as the actual dots. The dots per inch is not as important as pixels per inch. In this case, we have kept the ratio locked. So if we take a look at that, again, let's go right-click, let's go edit, undo, go back to where it was, right-click, fit on screen. So let's say we wanted this to be almost like a graphic or something. We want to make a graphic of this. Maybe we don't want this ratio, this proportion. We can go to image size again, and this time take off this ratio lock. When you take that off, it's no longer locked. So I can make this 1 inch, and the height maybe could be a different, maybe this will be 4 inches instead, right? And so they're not the same. Click OK, and you get kind of a different looking piece of art, right? But that also affects, because it's a smaller canvas, basically a smaller image size, it does affect it. So here's an example here again, taking off the lock, making it 2 to 4. It changes the perspective, the proportion, and so forth of an image. And so, but it goes down from 8 megabytes to 2 megabytes. So it's still 2,000 kilobytes, but it is smaller. And if that's what you needed, that's a good way to go. Again, edit, undo, come back to where it was. We can also crop the image. So we can do it through image size, but we can also use the crop tool to help us crop the image. So when you click on that, we get these little kind of corners here. And let's say I wanted to print this out. Well, I can always just click and drag on the sides, and just click and drag the corners and so forth to whatever I like, and that would crop out what's not inside this rectangle. Press the escape key. But let's say I wanted a 5x7. Well, up here in the options bar, I can put in this first box 5, and the second box 7. And now this will always be a 5x7. So you can do edit, undo. So let's go back to crop. You can see 5x7. It'll give you kind of a picture of what you're going to crop. And I can click and drag in here with my, to make it a smaller piece. I can change the 5x7 to be different. If I just click the corners, I can make it bigger or smaller. So let's say maybe that's all I want. I can click and drag inside there. I'm dragging the picture. So if let's say that's all I wanted to have my flowers, there we go. I've got my 5x7, or I can switch that around, make it more vertical, and do 8x10s and so forth. So that would crop it to be the same proportion as, let's say, a photograph. I can clear that out, and then it could be whatever size we want it to be. So So if it gets cropped, just click Edit Undo. I'll undo the crop. Do you notice though when we did that crop and we clicked on it that we've got some grid lines here? And if you click over here, next to this picture, you click on this down triangle, you'll see there's a lot of different options showing up here of what could be. And if you click on it, you'll see you have different kind of lines show up, different kind of guidelines here, sort of, and it gives you something to look at. It gives you proportioning ideas. So we have this link here, and it's basically helping us with the rules of composition. And so one of them is the rules of third, and that is that important when you divide a picture up in thirds, both horizontally and vertically, important elements happen along the third lines, and horizontal third lines is where you want to line up important elements of your picture. So, for example, the edge of this window is lined up here, the way this line's kind of over here, the way these two meet, and there's something important going on here. That was a conscious decision to put something there that would draw your eyes, because your eyes will fall onto one of these four corners typically on an image. A good example is this one here. It's rule of thirds, and you can see this picture is kind of centered, and this one is not. I typically do pictures like this where you take the focus of that, but they're saying good composition technique might be better served. You make a more interesting picture if you follow the rule of thirds and line things up with the thirds. So down here, you can see it's right in the middle, kind of centered in this piece. In this example here, you notice the horizon line was brought to that third line, and then the vertical element was brought to the other third line. So here's the two pictures now. And looking at both of them are the same piece, which is the more interesting? I would say this one is. Another example using that rule of thirds. In this case, the eye of this particular lizard was in the third spot. So if you got more than one point of interest, make sure they hit those third spots, because your eyes will typically go there. And if it's the horizon, they also suggest you keep the horizon in the bottom third. That's typically what you'd want to see. All right, the grid was another option. So the rule of thirds is one of them. Grid is another option. In this case, it just keeps us visually knowing what's vertical and what's horizontal. If you remember that Native Americans dancing image, well, it was obvious, but maybe some other images you have isn't quite as obvious. And here they use that grid line to make sure things were lined up. And there might be more than one kind of rule of composition to make your images look well. This one here, called diagonals, basically creates a grid from the corner, a diagonal line from the corners over in both directions. And in this case, they lined one of these dolphins jumping through one of the, line up with one of these diagonals here. And these diagonals will change depending on the ratio of your image, where they're coming from, because they're coming from the corners, right, across to the other side. So if you have any sort of diagonal elements or any sort of motion going on in your images, using them as a tool is a good idea. The golden ratio was found by Leonardo Fibonacci around the year 1200, and there was a certain pattern that this person was noticing, certain ratios that are happening between length and width of elements that kept repeating themselves over and over again. And so the golden ratio in compositions of where there might be too much sky going on, you want more focus on the bottom, because remember, we're trying to fill in the bottom half typically. This might work a little bit better. It's using that same ratio that appears through nature and making squares kind of. There's a ratio between this height and this width, between this height and this width, and between this height and this width, and the whole thing height and width. So it kind of works like that in an image. The more common known as the golden spiral, and you can see how they took advantage of this in this particular image, that your eye naturally goes to the character standing there, and you can kind of sense it right away. It kind of mirrors the shape of the head here, and even goes into the kind of the eye area. It draws you right in. This is called the golden spiral. You'll see it in different kinds of shells and so forth. In sunflower, the way sunflower seeds are arranged. So there's a lot of places where you can find the golden section and the golden spiral happening in nature. And so they're using that as a compositional tool. So inside the folders given to you, I have an overlay that can be used in SketchUp to compose your images. And this composition tool, I call them overlays, 1, 2, 3, and 4, because it's the different locations, whether it's left, right, up, or down. And you can bring into SketchUp on one of your scenes, for example, a watermark. And we did this before in one of our previous projects in the SketchUp class. You bring in the watermark, you go to the styles and go to edit, click auto watermark and select the plus and pick which overlay you want, whether 1, 2, 3, or 4. And then click on overlay, stretch to fit the screen, in front of the screen, and it looks like this. And so that'll help you to organize, let's say, your view and then save the scene. So in this case, for example, I'm making sure that my vertical line is here, and I've also used this spiral to this rocking chair. And so those are the two things I use. This has all of them. It has the grid, the diagonals, the golden section, rectilinear, and also the rule of thirds and the golden spiral. So you've got all the different tools. And again, depending on which one you use will depend on lining things up. Once you have aligned it up, click a different scene tab, make a new scene without the overlay, and you can then export out an image that has good proportions. And there's even an extension at the 3D warehouse, and there's a link there that I provided for you that does a very similar thing of the rule of thirds and such. So you can see that they've got that there as a compositional. All right. Well, let's go ahead and go back to the flower. If by any chance they got cropped or moved or shrunk or whatever, you can undo. If that doesn't work, you can close it out and open it back up again, close it without saving and open it back up again, and you'll be fine. Talking about modifications. So let's say we have this image, but there's something about it that's not really what we wanted. Those orange colored flowers aren't really what we want to use in our scheme. We maybe have a different color scheme we want to highlight. So we can change the color of an image without having to take another photograph or picking different flowers and so forth. So let's start with clicking on this front color, this foreground color, and let's go ahead and select perhaps a different color we want it to be. So mine started out with white down here, so I'm just going to click and drag it up. I can go with hue, saturation, and brightness. So depending on how we lay it out, depends on what options I've got to choose from. Let's just go ahead and click on brightness here as our selection. And right now, this is kind of a color that's here. We can pick, let's say, one of these purpley ones. So it's kind of a pinkish purple color for our flower. Well, it'll become that. It's a pinkish color that we'll use when we change our flower. So now that foreground color is that pinkish color we selected. If we want to go back and change it, we can go over here too and change it over here as well. The same kind of idea. And then we're going to use our brush. And so if you hold down, if you right click, you'll get the color replacement brush. And notice how we've got options up here as well. So we basically right click, color replacement brush. Notice that little square means that's the current one. The graphics changed as well. And so now we want to know what we need to change. My mode, I made it color. And the tolerance, I went up to 50%. You can either click here and drag, or you can just click inside the box and type in 50, press enter. All right. Then I started on a color like this red, this kind of reddish color of the rose. I'm going to click and drag. And as I drag, you start seeing that it's getting replaced. And it seems to stay pretty well within the shape. In other words, it's not going outside of the shape and it's getting most of the red, right? If I was using a regular brush, I would have to be very careful about my edges. Okay, as it is, so I'm holding down the Alt key on my keyboard and using my scroll wheel on my mouse. You can see I've extended beyond here. So you've got to be a little bit careful because these two colors are very similar. Let's undo that a second. Let's go down here on this one that has very different areas. And you can see I can get to the edge pretty well without my being worried. See, now I got over here. I got out far enough that it found similarities. So again, you just kind of get close to it, but don't get too far out. Try and keep your circle within the shape itself, and you're pretty safe. Again, up here we do have that little problem with this because, you know, the colors are just too similar, right? The colors are just too similar. So let's say we're just going to do this one here. And then I'm just going to click and drag. What it's doing is it's looking at the color, it's replacing it with a similar color, and it's just basically saying, is it light or dark, right? So if it's a dark kind of orangey color, we'll replace it with a dark pinky color. And that's basically what we're doing here. And the little plus in the center is where that color change is happening. All right. So that looks pretty good. So let's say we fixed that flower we got taken care of. That's one way of doing it. And sometimes that might be an easy way, a quick way. It was good down here, not so good up here. So what's another way of handling this? What's another way of working with this? Well, we can go to replace a color, right? So this orangey is really the one we need to replace. So I'm going to go to select, and I'm going to select the color range. Right? There's no other orangey pieces here. There's no other orangey pieces here. So over here it's going to show us what we've selected by whites and darks, but we're not going to, we don't mess with anything in here. We can't change anything that's in here. It's just showing us what we've selected. We've got these little eyedroppers, and we're going to just pick on this first one, and I'll pick this here. And then we've got the fuzziness factor. And so I'm going to bring that up to 50. Or yeah, 50 or 51. You can type in there if you want. And you can see that if I click on a different color, I will get a different selection. Right? If I click on a dark area, I'll get all the dark areas. If I click on a light area, I'll get all the light areas. Basically similar colors like the one I picked, right? Because these are all pixels of colors with a range of 50, we're saying, for the fuzziness, meaning a little bit lighter, a little bit darker by a grouping of 50. What I typically like to do is I like to select one and then click on this plus symbol to start adding to that selection. So I'm going to start then clicking around, and you can see I can pick some lighters and some darker elements. And I get more and more of the flowers. Bring out that fuzziness factor. You could, getting enough of that fuzziness factor, grab some of that background. You see that? Because whatever color I had, because I've made it such a great fuzziness, it's grabbing pieces that I did not intend to select. So you kind of be careful about your selection. Otherwise, you might be changing more than what you think you want to change. You might get some of this background as well. But that looks pretty good. Ideally, you're going to want this to be fully enclosed like that. So that looks good. Click OK. And now we've got a little marching ants, right? Look at these little marching ants everywhere. And then we can go to Image, Adjustments, Hue and Saturation. This dialog box comes up. And now I can play around with this hue, and as I do, look at this. I'm changing the color of those flowers. And I do have to be careful too, because of the flowers, I can make it be more saturated, really quite soft, maybe, and play around with it, maybe a lot lighter. And when I got just quite the right kind of pinkiness, I'll click OK. And then here they are. The flowers, maybe the way I want them to be. I find that an easier tool to use than the replace color, but again, it's there and available to you either way. Sometimes one might work better than the other. So the flower is still selected. So let's say we like how we have it here. So I'll do Control D to deselect. And then let's say we're going to save this image so that we can put it into our SketchUp file or wherever we're going to put it on. We're going to go File, Save As, and I can save it as a JPEG. Maybe give it a different name, like Flowers 2. Hit Save. And a lot of times I just let it do the maximum quality. Because remember, we can always resize it later. We can always make the pixels smaller, but let's start with the max we can get and go from there. So now this is called Flowers 2 JPEG. If I want to maybe get back to it in Photoshop, maybe we'll look at it later and want to change it. We can go to File, Save As, and then here we are the different types, right? And Photoshop would be a type. We can hit Save. And so now we've got this as a Photoshop file. Again, you can see the difference in the way it's classified there. So we can also do Save a Copy. If we do Save a Copy, the one that opened is still here. For this is a Photoshop here. Let's go File, Save a Copy, and I'm going to save it as let's say a JPEG, and I'm going to call it Flowers 3. Hit Save. Okay. So notice that this is not changed. This is still Flowers 2 Photoshop. We've got Flowers 3 saved in our folder. These are the standard formats that we'll typically be using. PSD files, this is Photoshop document, and that's basically the native file, and that'll open up in Photoshop programs. It keeps the different layers. We haven't done layers in this particular examples, but there will be layers in future examples, and we may want to keep those. JPEG is just a way of compressing a file. If you keep using the JPEG over and over and over and over again, it will eventually degrade the quality a little bit. So they usually recommend you do it the highest setting all the time to keep it the least amount of change to the original. PDFs is to share with people that don't have image programs or can't use or see JPEGs or PNG files. PDFs, though, you can't use it at a photo lab to print it out. So it has to be some other format, either the JPEG or the PNG files. PNGs are portable network graphics. They're like JPEGs. The thing about PNGs is, though, they can support transparency, and we'll be using that in a future exercise. EPS, encapsulated PostScript. It's mostly if it has text, but a lot of times when you open them up in Photoshop, it becomes a PSD file. So I've not needed to use an encapsulated PostScript pretty much format, but it is a popular one that some folks do, especially if there's text involved. TIFF is used for commercial printing. So if you go to commercial printer, they'll probably want a TIFF file. And these are the major ones. And pretty much for using into the program, JPEGs or PNGs into the SketchUp program is pretty much what we'll be using. Changing the color is really handy, though, in situations like this where perhaps you have a model from SketchUp, but you need to have a different color arrangement. So just to be aware, I've got this multi-C-Man 0323 free model from Axis Design, and you can kind of take a look. It's basically the same model, and all they've done is taken some of the coloring and replaced it using the similar tool we did with the flowers. This can also be used maybe talking with clients, so you could create an image and then play around with different color selections. In this one here, they're deciding whether or not to paint that back wall an accent color. Or here, looking at the different color tones they want to use and whether it's better to be a darker color in the middle or towards the bottom. So this gives you a kind of a look. And by the way, I think this is better to have that accent there. It really makes this area stand out and gives kind of highlight. And in this one, it's typically better to have darker colors towards the bottom. The image editing lecture portion is completed now. You can turn your attention to the assignment in the module.